Thanks for staying with us on SABC News. Absa says South Africa's jobs recovery from the pandemic appears incomplete, especially when compared to labour markets of more advanced economies. Peter Worthington from Absa joins me now. Thanks so much for your time on SABC News. So you use the quarterly employment statistics and the quarterly labour force survey to look at the jobs picture in South Africa. What are you seeing?
Well, they present in some ways quite divergent messages. We see a much greater degree of apparent job losses during the pandemic from the quarterly labour force survey of households, and a smaller loss of jobs from the quarterly employment statistics, which is a firm-based survey. But the former, the survey of households, had big measurement problems during the pandemic when Stats SA had to move from face-to-face interviews to telephonic interviews. And we think that has kind of overestimated the job losses in the pandemic, but consequently now it is also overestimating the recovery as they move back to face-to-face interviews. But critically, both surveys are showing that we're still below pre-pandemic levels of employment. If you look at that quarterly employment statistics, for example, it was showing that only 42,000 jobs were created in the first quarter, and actually all of those were temporary census workers. So we are below pre-pandemic levels of employment, regardless of which survey measure you look at. And we also we thought it was an appropriate time to take a look at the prospects for employment going forward, because consumers in South Africa are being quite hard hit by the rise in living costs. And obviously employment income is sort of the biggest source of household income and is a key determinant of their ability to spend. And unfortunately, when you look over the history of South Africa, it doesn't really matter what time period you look at. Our economy has not had a very good record on creating jobs.
We'll get into that, Peter. I just wanted to find out the comparison that you were doing when it comes to the recovery. You were comparing that with advanced economies. Just give us a sense of which economies those were and what that part of the data said to you.
Sure. So if you look at sort of economies, the US, the UK, Canada, economies in the Eurozone as well, they all have had really pretty robust jobs recovery. So, for example, if we take the US, we're sort of at multi-decade lows in unemployment. And what we have is sort of far number of job vacancies than there are actually people looking for jobs. Now, what that's done in all of those economies, of course, is it's created a bit of a wage price spiral where employers are having to raise wage rates quite significantly in order to attract the small number of workers that are willing to come back to the labor force and actually work. And that's a very different picture from what we have here.
Okay, so you touched on this earlier on, but South Africa's GDP grew by 1.9% in the first quarter, and often that we see with economic growth comes more employment opportunities. That's not really the case for us.
Not really. We have what's called, economists call it an elasticity of employment with respect to growth, and ours is less than 1. We did some econometric estimates that kind of confirmed the academic literature that finds similar elasticities. And what it means is if the economy grows 1%, then employment grows at a fraction of 1%. And that's a problem while we have our fairly muted growth outlook. We think that trend growth in South Africa is going to be around 1.5%, maybe a little bit more, but not much with our current policy settings and all of the problems we have in our network industries, insufficient electricity supply, transport constraints and the like. But this is a key number because 1.5% is also close to the population growth rate. And so if GDP grows 1.5% trend, it means that employment is likely to grow a fair amount less than that, which means it's not going to keep pace with population growth and the new entrants to the labor market. And that means the unemployment rate is likely to continue rising, unfortunately.
Yeah, let's go into that more. What are you seeing when it comes to future unemployment trends? And it's quite a bleak picture. It
is at the current juncture. So we have the problem that I've just outlined. Now, there are two solutions for that. One, we could sort of turbocharge the economy, do the right policies that will enable GDP to grow at 3.5%, 4%. And that would be a pace that would generate enough jobs for new entrants to the labor market and hopefully make a little bit of inroads in solving our unemployment challenge. The other solution, and actually it's part of the same solution really, but the other way it would express would be making policy changes that would improve the ability of the economy to generate jobs for a certain GDP growth. And in that, we might want to do things like improve training, because we have a big supply of labor, but it's not suitably skilled for a modern economy. We have kind of an abundance of labor, but a shortage of skilled labor. So maybe a big part of the solution ought to be fixing training and education so that sort of school leavers are suitably skilled for the modern economy and for the jobs that are available. Mm-hmm. But there might be other policy interventions that we should be looking at. Perhaps there are some changes to the labor relations framework. For example, lightening the regulatory burden on small and medium-sized enterprises in respect of their workforce. Mm-hmm. And I find it interesting that that is one of the policy proposals which has been suggested by the governing party for discussion at the upcoming policy conference. We may also look at initiatives like an employment matching service that's publicly funded, because for low-income earners in South Africa, the cost of looking for a job is incredibly high when set against the sort of fairly limited chances of finding a job and the low wages that would come with the job. Maybe there is a role here for the government to actually reduce that cost of job search by having a publicly funded and well-run employment matching service for workers at the lower end of the income spectrum.
Peter Worthington from Absa, thanks so much for your time and insight there, just speaking to us about the labour market in South Africa and the challenges that have been faced and that are to come as well in the future. Now, the Office of the Public Protector has clarified